I've been noticing something about two words, selfish and selfless. We use them like they're opposites, like they sit at two ends of a line. And our job is to figure out which end we belong on. Most of us already know which end we were assigned. Don't be selfish, think of others, put their needs first. That's what good people do. And it sounds right. Of course it does. It sounds like common sense. And I want to be clear, this didn't come from nowhere. For many of us, this was learned early. In families where someone else's needs were louder, in environments where keeping the peace meant staying small, in systems where being easy, being accommodating, being the one who holds it all together, that was the safest move. Of course, we learned this. Of course, we organized our entire way of being around it. It wasn't a mistake. It was intelligent. It kept things from falling apart. It kept us connected to people we needed. It kept us safe. So when I say I've been noticing something about these two words, I'm not saying we were wrong to learn what we learned. I'm saying the thing we learned might not be the whole picture. Here's what I've been sitting with. If those are the only two options, selfish or selfless, then every time I attend to myself, I'm doing something wrong. Every time I pause, every time I say no, every time I notice I'm tired and actually stop, something inside tightens. Because the binary says, if it's about you, it's selfish. If it's about them, it's good. And most of us have been living inside that frame without ever questioning whether it's complete. The cost of that is quiet. It doesn't show up dramatically. It shows up as the person who hasn't rested in years, but can't explain why they feel guilty when they try. It shows up as the leader who absorbs every crisis and then wonders why they feel hollow on a Sunday afternoon. It shows up as the partner who gives and gives and gives, and then one day snaps over something small and can't figure out why they're so angry. That anger didn't come from the small thing. It came from years of abandoning yourself and calling it virtue. What I've been noticing is this: selfish and selfless aren't actually opposites. They're two versions of the same thing. They're both survival strategies. One says, I'll take care of me and everyone else is secondary. The other says, I'll take care of everyone else and I'm secondary. Different direction, same operating system. Both of them are organized around scarcity. Both of them assume there isn't enough to go around. Both of them believe someone has to lose. The selfish person decided it won't be them. The selfless person decided it will be. And they've been told those are the only two chairs in the room. Let's stay with the selfless side for a moment, because that's where most of the people I talk to live. Selflessness looks generous from the outside. It looks like caring, like devotion, like reliability. And sometimes it is those things. But underneath, quietly, there's often a transaction happening that no one agreed to. It goes something like this. If I take care of you, eventually you'll take care of me. If I'm the one who holds it together, eventually someone will hold it together for me. If I make sure everyone else is okay, eventually someone will notice that I'm not. That's not manipulation. It's hope. It's the only strategy we had. If I can't take care of myself without it being selfish, then my only option is to take care of everyone else and hope it comes back around. That's a survival strategy wearing the clothes of generosity. And it works just well enough to keep us in it until it doesn't. Here's the part that can sting a little. When someone organizes their life around selflessness, around being the one who gives, absorbs, accommodates, they tend to find people who are perfectly comfortable receiving. Not always bad people, not always intentionally selfish people. Just people who never had to develop the habit of reciprocating because they didn't have to. Because someone was always already doing it for them. And the selfless person looks at this and thinks, I just haven't found the right people yet. But the system isn't broken. The system is working exactly as designed. If I've decided that attending to my own needs is selfish, then I will abdicate responsibility for my own restoration. And then I'll look outward for someone to restore me. But the people I find, the ones who are drawn to someone who will carry everything, those are not the people who will carry me. Not because they're cruel, but because the arrangement doesn't require it of them. So the selfless person becomes more depleted, more resentful, more confused about why nothing ever feels mutual. And the binary tightens, because asking for something feels selfish. And not asking is killing them slowly. This is where that inner voice comes in. You know, the one that says you're not doing enough, that you should be handling this better, that other people have it harder, that you don't get to complain. We tend to talk about the inner critic as if it's a character, a villain we need to silence, a voice we need to manage or overcome. But I've been wondering if it's something simpler than that. What if the inner critic isn't a voice at all? What if it's just what it feels like to be trapped inside a binary where both exits punish you? Choose yourself, selfish. Abandon yourself, depleted. There's no option in that frame where attending to yourself is permitted. So, of course, there's a voice that sounds harsh. It's the sound of an impossible setup. Not a character flaw, not evidence that something is wrong with you. Just the felt experience of having no viable third option. And when that voice has been running long enough, something happens that's worth noticing. We stop wanting to be here. Not in the dramatic sense, in the quiet sense. We stop wanting to be in our own company. We stop wanting to sit still. We stop wanting to be alone with ourselves. Because being alone with ourselves means being alone with that voice. And that voice has been telling us for years that we are either too much or not enough. And that's an exhausting place to live. So what do? We leave. Not physically. We leave ourselves. We find something, anything, that makes the internal environment quieter. The scroll, the drink, the snack, the purchase, the project, the overwork, the next episode, the staying busy. Not because we lack discipline, but because the inside is hostile. And no one taught us another way to be in there. Think about that for a moment. If the only two options you've been given are to sacrifice yourself or be a bad person, and you've been choosing sacrifice for years, and the voice inside still says it's not enough, of course you'd want to leave. Of course you'd look for something to numb the noise. That's not a failure of willpower. That's a rational response to an architecture that offered no other exit. Most of what we call addiction or distraction is just someone trying to get a break from themselves. And the reason they need a break is that being with themselves was never made safe. You can see how this shows up in relationships too. The selfless person gives, they anticipate, they smooth things over, They absorb the mood of the room. And they don't ask for much. Not because they don't need anything, but because asking feels dangerous. Asking means admitting you have a need. And having a need inside this frame is selfish. So instead of asking, they hint. They sigh. They get quiet. They do things loudly and hope someone notices. And when no one notices, because no one was told what to look for, the hurt deepens. And the selfless person doesn't think, maybe I need to ask for what I want. They think, nobody cares. And the resentment builds slowly, quietly, underneath the giving. Until one day it surfaces as an explosion that looks disproportionate, but is actually years of unmet need that was never named because naming it would have been selfish. That's not a communications problem. That's a permission problem. This shows up at work, too. The leader who never delegates because asking for help feels like admitting weakness. The manager who absorbs every problem because that's what good leaders do. The executive who hasn't taken a real day off in months because if they stop, who will hold it all together? They call it dedication. They call it leading by example. They call it having a strong work ethic. And sometimes it is those things. But sometimes it's just the selfish, selfless binary dressed up in professional language. If I attend to my own capacity, that's selfish. If I absorb everything, that's leadership. And the team learns. The team learns not to bring solutions because the leader will carry it. The team learns to push back because the leader will accommodate. The team learns that the system runs on one person's depletion. And everyone adjusts accordingly. Not because they're taking advantage, but because the system was designed that way. And the leader, the selfless one, can't understand why they're so exhausted when they're doing everything right. They are doing everything right inside the binary. And that's the problem. So here's where something starts to shift. What if there's a place that isn't on that line at all? Not the selfish end, not the selfless end, not a compromise between the two, not a healthy balance of giving and taking. Something more foundational than that. What if taking responsibility for yourself genuinely, not as a performance, not as a technique? What if that isn't selfish at all? What if it's the prerequisite for being any real use to anyone? Because here's what I've noticed. When someone is resourced, when they've actually attended to what they need, something shifts in how they show up. Compassion stops being a sacrifice, it becomes available. Decisions stop being agonized, they become clear. Other people stop being a threat to your reserves, they become people. And something else becomes possible. Solutions that don't require someone to lose. Not because you negotiated harder, not because you compromised better, but because no one at the table is running on empty. You can't find a resolution that honors both of us if I've already abandoned myself to be in this conversation. You can't be genuinely kind to another person from a place of depletion. What comes out of depletion might look like kindness, but it's performance. And eventually, the performance cracks. This isn't selfishness with better branding. This is the recognition that you cannot give what you don't have. And that having something to give requires that you stop treating your own needs as a moral violation. I want to come back to something I said earlier, being kind to yourself. That phrase gets used a lot, and it usually lands as something soft, patronizing even. Take a bath, light a candle, say nice things in the mirror. That's not what I mean. What I mean is something much more ordinary. Think about what it's like to be with someone you actually like. Not someone you're performing for, not someone you're managing, not someone whose approval you're earning. Just someone you like. There's a quality to that. Your patience with them. You're interested in what they think. You don't rush them. You don't punish them when they're struggling. And you don't tell them they should be further along. You're just with them. Now imagining directing that toward yourself. Not as an exercise and not as a technique. Just what would it be like to be in your own company the way you'd be in the company of someone you like? For a lot of us, that question lands strangely. Because we've spent so long being at war with ourselves that we don't know what it would feel like to be on our own side. The inner critic has been running so long that it doesn't even sound like a critic anymore. It just sounds like reality. You're not doing enough. You should be further along. What's wrong with you? That's not reality. That's the sound of a binary that never gave you permission to be here as someone worth attending to. And when that binary loosens, even a little, the inner critic doesn't have to be silenced. It just quiets on its own. Because it was never a voice that needed managing. It was the sound of an impossible setup. And when the setup changes, the sound changes too. I'm not suggesting you change anything. I'm not offering a fix. I'm not saying stop being generous. I'm not saying start being selfish. I'm just noticing that the binary most of us inherited, selfish or selfless, may not be the whole menu. And that the exhaustion, the resentment, the distraction, the inner critic, the quiet depletion, those aren't failures of discipline or character. They're what happens when someone has been surviving inside a frame that was never complete. You weren't being too selfish. You were never given a third option. And just noticing that, just seeing the frame, is often where something starts to loosen. Not because you've done anything, but because something that was invisible just became visible. And that changes the field. You don't need to take this anywhere. You don't need to do anything with it. You don't need to fix your relationships or your patterns or your inner voice by Tuesday. Just noticing where the binary has been running and how long it's been running is enough for now. Nothing has gone wrong. I'll leave it here.